Yeah, welcome back from the break. I would like to introduce Sarah Loos, who's a research fellow here in Cambridge, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Luke, for giving me the opportunity to speak here to you. So I'm going to talk about dragging with minimum effort, optimal control protocols for particles with self-propulsion and memory. And I'm quite fortunate that a lot of the topics that I'm going to talk about have already been nicely introduced by the first two speakers. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think one doesn't really need to motivate much why we want to look at energy efficient solutions for processes or systems. That is something we all very well know on the macro scale, but that is also, of course, true on the micro scale. And in some sense, you could say that it becomes even more important if you look at machines or processes at the micro scale, because if you go to low Reynolds numbers, you know that the friction will dominate your processes, so you naturally have high losses due to friction. And at the same time, if you imagine that you would like to build a robot on the size of a single blood cell or something, then of course it's also easy to understand that it's quite difficult to fuel such a machine. So you have the situation that you have high losses and limited energy supply. So I think it's quite clear that it's a pressing issue to think about energy optimization for machines on these scales. And on top of that, you also have to deal with non-thermal and thermal noise. And in many of these biological machines, you would also have to deal with activity of the system that you want to control or the environment. And another thing is that the media in such biological systems like molecular motor, for example, are very often not just purely viscous fluids, but they have some intrinsic correlations, some intrinsic relaxation processes giving rise to memory effects. So this could be because you have a cytoskeleton as your environment, blood or intracellular plasma, and so on. So if you have viscoelasticity or any kind of memory, that means that your surrounding does not remain in equilibrium. And as I also said, sometimes the environment would be active itself. So that's also clearly out of equilibrium. Okay, and from a mathematical point of view, if you want to optimize the energy efficiency of some processes, you can view this as an optimal control problem. So in this case, it would be a thermodynamic optimal control problem. So you would ask, what is the most energy efficient way of transitioning a system from state A to state B? And you would look for the protocol that does this. So the protocol would be some sort of external control, some sort of external forcing, a force field or something as a function of time. And we are focusing on solutions that does this in fixed time, TF, while minimizing some costs. And this cost functional would now be chosen to be a thermodynamic cost functional, such as the work input, the produced entropy, or the dissipated heat. And in this talk, I'm going to focus on parametric control or limited control problems, where you can only control a finite number of parameters and not a whole field or something like that. And as I said, so the questions that I want to address is how having memory in your system or activity would affect such optimal control solutions. Okay, if we have purely linear processes, we can solve such optimal control problems. So for example, in this paper here, they have introduced a problem where you have a particle in a trap, and you want to tighten the trap or you want to loosen the trap in a given time. And you ask, what's the optimal protocol to do this? And this is a purely linear problem. So it can be solved analytically via Euler-Lagrange equations. And what they found is that you have jumps of the protocol in the beginning and in the end. So what you want to do is that initially you quench quite a lot, then you have a regime where you go slowly in time, and then at the end you do, again, a very fast quench of your trap. And if you look through the literature of optimal control, you will find that the occurrence of such jumps is a quite generic feature. So these discontinuities in your solutions of the protocol at the beginning and end are called bang-bang solutions. And this is a very generic feature that you find many times. And these jumps generically vanish in the quasi-static limit, where you just go infinitely slow. And yeah, in this paper, it was shown that you always have these jumps if your time of the process goes to 0. But that's also kind of expected, because then the only thing you can do is really going infinitely fast. But it was shown that this also holds if you allow for a little bit of time in between. So if you do not have a linear process, then you cannot solve this problem analytically, and you have to rely on some different approaches. And there are quite versatile approaches introduced in the literature to solve such problems. I think for those who have been here yesterday, Luke gave a seminar about this. So there is in particular this geometric approach based on response theory, which also has some deep connection to the theory of optimal transport. And I just want to summarize the key idea. So you can do two things. Either you say you start from this infinitely fast protocols, which you can solve generically, so allowing it, so just basically don't allowing any time for your process. And then you know that you have two jumps that are connected by a straight line. Or you would start from the quasi-static limit, where you go infinitely slow, and then you can again solve everything, even if it's nonlinear, and you just go linearly in time. And the idea of these approaches, basically, if I simplify them, is you start from these, and then you use response theory in a clever way to treat your control as a perturbation to the system, to go from this or this side to finite time solutions. And this has been applied to different kinds of systems, from chemical and biological systems, also to active matter in this recent, very nice PRX article by Luke. Today, I'm going to talk about a problem that is, again, exactly solvable, so that we can study the impact of memory and activity. So we were inspired by this problem of a molecular motor that drags a load with, or these robots that want to move things around in the cell. And if you simplify this, you could say you have a carrier that is harmonically connected to some load, and you ask how to move that carrier in order to bring the load from A to B in a finite time. Or equivalently, you can look at a particle in a trap, which would have the same mathematical description. So we ask if our trap is initially in some given position, and we want to bring it to a target position in a finite time, how should we move the trap as a function of time? To do that by spending the lowest amount of work possible. And this is, of course, nice, these kind of systems, because this is now the setup that is realized in lots of experiments nowadays with colloids in optical traps. So this kind of system can be realized in experiments quite nicely. Okay, so again, the optimal control problem that we're studying is how shall we move the trap center over a finite distance in a finite time, minimizing the average work. And this is simple enough to be studied analytically so that we can look at memory and activity. Okay, so the plan is to now look at this system in the presence of some viscoelastic surrounding. And the work that I'm presenting has also been published already this year. And at the end, I will give a very brief outlook where instead of considering a viscoelastic surrounding, we look at the same problem, but we replace the passive particle by an active particle, and we study what is the optimal protocol to move this active particle. Okay, so first we need to think about what is the work that we have to spend in this case anyway. So clearly, if you move the trap, what you do is you increase the potential energy of the particle. So this is the work that you need to spend. And if you look at the differential of the potential energy, you see that it's composed of two terms. So the first term can be identified as the heat, and the second term can be identified as the work. So this is now the work that we need to spend. which is this simple functional here. And if we look at the Markovian case, so just a particle in a viscous surrounding, we can describe the equations of motion by a Langevin equation with white noise. Everything is solvable, as I said. So now we optimize this work functional here, and what we find is that the optimal protocol has again these two jumps that we already saw for the other problem, and it's linear in between. And yeah, so we find these jumps, and in this case, the jumps are symmetric. So there is the same jump at the beginning and end of the trap, of the protocol, and you drive linearly in between. And if you allow for more time, these jumps will get shorter and shorter, and eventually you will just move your trap with constant speed and you will approach the quasi-static limit. And what I also want to point out is that while you start in a situation where the particle is fully relaxed within the trap, so you are in equilibrium, you end with a situation where your particle is actually displaced from the trap center. So the process actually continues after your time TF. There's a relaxation process. But this we do not need to take into account because during that process we do not spend any external work because the trap is standing still, right? Okay, so this problem was already also solved in this paper by Udo Seifert from 2007. We just repeated this, and my experimental collaborators, they realized this now in an experiment and checked whether this could be reproduced by colloids in optical traps. So we have an optical trap with a colloid, and instead of really moving the trap, what they do is they move the fluid. And what they did is they varied the protocol they varied the jump height, but kept the shape of the protocol. And here what we see is that the minimum work is really spent at the jump height that comes out of the prediction. So everything works quite well. And I should note that the protocol is actually not realized quite perfectly in the experiment. And this is because this whole stage has some inertia. So you cannot jump infinitely fast, but you only have these washed out jumps, if you like. And nevertheless, our prediction matched quite well. Okay, so this was just to get things going, but then we were interested in the viscoelastic case that has not been studied so far. So again, motivated by biological systems, which often have these viscoelastic surroundings, we asked what happens if we put this problem into, say, a polymer solution, or in our case, a micellar solution. So from a mathematical point of view, you can describe this process now by a generalized Langevin equation, where in addition to the white noise, you have a colored noise and a memory kernel. And lucky for me, the experiments that they do in in solutions with worm-like micelles can be described very well by a Maxwell model. So our memory kernel and our colored noise correlations are just given by an exponential decay with a single decay time. So I only have to take into account one additional variable. And instead of dealing with the non-Markovian model, we can also describe this by two coupled Markovian equations, which are linear, as you can see. So in order to solve this problem, what we did was adding this fictitious variable to write this as a two-coupled Markovian Langevin equation, then formulate the cost functional for these variables, then use Euler-Lagrange, and at the end project back. And I'm just showing you this to show you, here's the protocol now, that despite this problem looking maybe fairly simple because it's just linear equations, you get quite non-trivial protocols. So this was the Markovian case, so you have jump, linear, jump. And now if we introduce the environment with memory, what we find is that this is the new shape of the protocol. So you get this non-linear curve throughout, and you still have jumps at the beginning and end. And a way to understand why you have these additional features here is by thinking about how the energy flows through the system. So we apply external work And in the Markovian case, that would just be translated to potential energy, which eventually is dissipated to the heat bath. While now, this micellar solution can store elastic energy, so you have also energy flowing back later, and this can at least explain a little bit why you get these nonlinear solutions. Okay, and yeah, again, my experimental collaborators kindly performed their experiments, and we again found that the curve that you measure in the experiments, if you vary the potentials, matches very well to the analytical prediction. So everything worked quite well. Now, my experimental collaborators, they looked at the protocols and the mean particle trajectories that you find for the optimal solutions. And they asked me, why are these solutions always time symmetric? So if we look at the protocol or the mean particle position, they notice that they have this symmetry property. And this is also true for the Markovian case. And they asked me, is there a thermodynamic reason or something why you would always have this symmetry? And I needed to think about this for quite some time. First, I thought it could have something to do with the excess entropy production that you want to minimize, because time-reversed symmetry really sounded like entropy production to me. And here we optimize the thermodynamic quantity. So I thought maybe it's because we can say that there is a certain amount of work that we always need to do, and then some additional work, and this additional work vanishes in the optimal case. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any thermodynamic principle that would tell me about the symmetry, but there is a mathematical reason. And actually, we can prove that this time-reversed symmetry is a property of these optimal solutions generically. And to do this, we started with a generalized Langevin equation. So we write down a linear Langevin equation where we keep the memory and the colored noise completely free, and we make no assumption on that. But we do assume that the memory kernel is time-translational invariant. So meaning that your system is in a steady state and time-translational invariant. And then we also assume causality, but that's a very mild assumption. So, and with that, we can actually prove this symmetry property. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So first of all, we looked at the different possible implications and non-implications. So having an optimal protocol or an optimal process, the symmetry of the protocol alone, and the symmetry of the mean path. And first, let's look at some non-implications, which you can easily show by giving counterexamples. So having a symmetric protocol does not imply having a symmetric solution, and it also doesn't imply that your process is optimal, which you can easily show by just realizing a linear protocol in finite time. Then also the other directions here can also be shown by a counterexample. So you can construct a protocol that has a single jump in the beginning. So this is, and no jump at the end. So this is clearly non-symmetric, yet the corresponding particle trajectory is symmetric. So that tells you that having a symmetric trajectory doesn't imply a symmetric protocol and also doesn't imply an optimal solution. But what about the remaining possible implications? So the main idea to show this was to rewrite the work functional in a different form. And in particular, to show the implication between optimality and the symmetry of the protocol, we want to write it as a functional of the protocol only. And yeah, this can be done by going to Laplace domain to rewrite your particle trajectory using a response function. Then you can plug it in, and then you find that the work can be written as a functional of the protocol only. And it turns out that this functional is a quadratic functional only of the derivative of the protocol. And because it is quadratic, that clearly immediately tells you that if you reverse the protocol, that this would give you the same amount of work. And it also tells you that because it's quadratic, it can only have a unique optimum. And if I combine these two information, so any protocol and its time reverse image give me the same work, yet I can only have one optimum, then it tells you that the optimal protocol needs to be time reversal symmetric. And a similar thing can be done by rewriting the work functional as a function of only the mean particle position. So in order to do this, you plug in the first law and do some modifications, and then you can see that you can write the work functional also in this form. And again, this is quadratic in x dot. So by the same arguments that I presented before, we find that any kind of optimal protocol needs to be symmetric in x. So the only thing that needs to be done is to look at the reverse implication. And this can also be shown. So if you assume that the protocol and the mean particle trajectory are both symmetric, you can show that the process obeys this integral equation here. And starting from the work functional written as a functional of x dot only, and using variational calculus, you can also show that the fact that the variance of the work vanishes is also exactly given when this integral equation here is fulfilled. So this now readily shows the reverse direction. So we have completed the whole diagram. So this is quite nice. Now, because we have both directions, what that tells us is that the symmetry is an exclusive property of the optimal case. And this means that you can use the symmetry to discern optimal processes from other processes. And that, on the other hand, means you can define the asymmetry via the asymmetry and alternative cost functional for your optimization. And the good thing about this is that you a priori know the value at the minimum, because you know that the asymmetry needs to be 0, while if you optimize the work, you never know if you quite reach the optimum, because you could always, you don't know what the minimum work would be. So to demonstrate that, we trained a deep neural network first to minimize the work, and then again we trained another one to optimize the symmetry. And what we found is that they both converge. In this case, the asymmetry also leads to a quicker convergence, but this is just may depend on the algorithm. So this is just to show that you can use the symmetry as an alternative cost functional. And the other thing, which is quite nice, is that in this proof, we haven't used any particular property of the memory kernel or of the colored noise. So this tells you that the symmetry is universal for these minimum work dragging processes for a quite wide range of systems, including particles in granular or glassy media, and also in active bars. So in particular, we did not assume any fluctuation-dissipation relation. So this should also hold for a particle in an active environment. And concerning active particles, I just want to mention a last thing, is that we also now study this problem where we add an active particle instead of a passive particle. So this work is done in collaboration with Rosalba Garcia Milan from King's College and Yannick Schüttler and Mike Cates from University of Cambridge. And in this case, again, we can describe our equations of motion by a generalized Langevin equation, if you want to call it like that. But of course, in this case, we don't have a memory kernel, but we just have a colored noise. So in 1D, this could be, for example, described by an active Ornstein-Uhlenbeck particle model that Rob already introduced, or a run-and-tumble particle model. Both give us the same correlations of the noise, which are exponential. And with this now, we are studying what is the impact of activity on the optimal protocols. We also consider the closed loop case, so where we take into account measurements of the system state and see how they affect the protocols. And if you do that, you can start to extract work through the measurements. So we also study an active information engine based on this very simple process. And just as a side note, if you look at this equation, you see that it's actually not that different from my viscoelastic equation that I had before, where you couple an auxiliary variable that is reciprocally coupled to your system degree of freedom and gives rise to exponential memory in the noise and also an exponential memory kernel, while now an active Ornstein-Uhlenbeck particle is non-reciprocally coupled. So the self-propulsion or active variable would affect the position of the particle, but not vice versa, giving rise to no memory kernel, but exponentially decaying noise. Yeah, so I can take the same model and just cross out two terms. So it's actually a bit simpler to solve in that sense. Yet, in this case, you may think about the definition of the work. So we have studied the external work input, but if you have an active particle, you may also think about incorporating the work that the particle itself is doing. And we are studying both of these definitions. Yeah, so I hope I could tell you a bit about optimal dragging, which I think is a very nice, simple example problem to study optimal control of active or non-active systems. And in particular, we studied the effect of having correlations in the environment. And we found that they strongly affect the optimal dragging strategy. I told you about this symmetry, which is a universal feature of this dragging problem. And yeah, there are many open questions. The model is also very nice because, as I told you, it can be realized in experiments. And it's actually a quite relevant problem in experiments because you often want to bring particles from A to B. So it's not as academic as it may sound. Yeah, and then let me just thank my collaborators, in particular Samuel Monta, who has done the experiments and in the lab of Clemens Bechinger, and Yannick Schüttler, who is actually going to give a lightning talk about the case of an active particle this afternoon and also has a poster on that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Any questions?
Yeah, so when we were talking about the similarities between the optimal protocols in the Markovian and non-Markovian case, and you're relating this to the energy flows.
Yes.
Can you speak a bit more about that? It wasn't clear to me how
Yeah. It was because I noticed that I'm running out of time, so I was a bit fast here. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so indeed, so the main difference is that if you have the Markovian solution, any kind of work that you do is really to increase the potential energy of the particle, but then this would just be dissipated through the heat bath and it cannot come back, right? But here in this case, it's now different. So if you move through the viscoelastic surrounding, what happens if you displace your particle a lot, you will start to deform your environment. So you pump a lot of elastic energy into the surrounding, and then if you would do nothing, what would happen is that you would be dragged back to where you've been before. So there's this recoil. And I think what you need, the reason why you do this nonlinear motion here is because you want to first you go fast, but then you need to slow down a little bit because otherwise you would have this recoil that would pull you back. And then at the end, you can go again very fast because then you delay the recoil towards after the protocol has stopped, and then you don't really care anymore. So I think this is the reason why you go fast at the end again. But this is just hand-waving argument, so they cannot measure this in experiments, unfortunately. Not in these experiments, at least.
Any more questions?
I have one more question, but if anyone has another.
I mean, sure.
Okay, so how dependent is on the fact that you're doing the dragging, or actually, how does it? Is your proof of the time symmetry of the protocols is really dependent on the fact that you're just doing dragging?
Yes, yeah.
If you're doing changing the stiffness of the trap, then you probably don't have the same proof of the symmetry.
Yeah, exactly. So the problem why you cannot do this is because then the work functional here would become nonlinear in x already, and then this whole idea doesn't work anymore. And actually, I think I showed these protocols where you only change the stiffness. Yeah, here they are not symmetric. Yeah. So the jumps are, yeah. So I think it's a feature of this particular problem. But on the other hand, I think that the idea of thinking about the symmetries that are encoded in the mathematical structure, instead of just thinking about physical arguments, is very helpful in general. And one should always check whether such symmetries are there or not. Because this optimal dragging problem has actually been studied already quite a lot, and nobody noticed this symmetry so far. But if you know that the symmetry is there, it simplifies the solutions enormously. So, for example, these closed form solutions that I've shown here, I didn't say it, but I already used here the symmetry property to get them. If you don't have them, there are some terms which are integrals that you cannot solve. I mean, maybe you can still do it, but I wasn't able to do it. So it's very, very helpful if you know the symmetry, of course.
And
so maybe just in the absence, in the presence of time, let's thank Sarah for a wonderful talk.